Hi everyone, welcome to THT, and today we're going to talk about Piett Red. So Piett Red is a deck that I've been playing since the very release of the game of the expansion, and it's a deck that I've been having a lot of fun playing with. And to be quite honest with you guys, I thought this deck was going to do a lot better in the meta that it initially did. Piett Red right now is kind of just like a tier 3 deck. It has done a couple of results in the last PQ weekend, where we saw it taking 1 PQ and also doing a double top 8 in a relatively large PQ as well. But forced to admit that the deck has not done as well as I initially thought. This is clearly kind of a tier 3 deck. What I think it deserves to, I think I was expecting it to be at least a tier 2 deck. So in this video, I'll try to explain the reason why maybe the deck hasn't done as well as we initially thought. What are the choice that some people are making that are making the deck worse than what it should be, in my opinion, and also what is, in my opinion, the best way to run the deck, as well as showing, of course, my version of the deck and how I run the deck. So hope you guys enjoyed that video, and before we start, we get into our sponsor of the day is Card Market, the biggest marketplace for buying and selling cards in Europe. So first of all, what is Piett Red? So Piett Red is a ramp mid-range deck, so where we're going to be trying to use Piett as your leader to give massive discount to your capital ship and allow you to put tremendous amount of pressure by playing capital ship 1 turn and 2 turns and sometimes 3 turns earlier than what they should be. And so the idea of the deck is you're going to be trying to answer the opponent's threats in early of the game while ramping at the same time. Ideally do both at the same time or do one or the other, and then slap a massive capital ship on the board, play a card like Overwhelming Barrage and Triple Laser Salvo, and then attack with those giant spaceship in order to finish the game as early as possible before the opponent has time to recover from the great damage we've dealt to him. So that's kind of the overall game plan. So currently there's 3 versions of Piett Red that you see play. There's the yellow version, the red version, and the blue version. And personally, I think that the red version is the best. And the reason for it is because, well, first of all, the yellow version used to be pretty good. Unfortunately, triple dark raid has been banned, which has made the deck so much worse. Basically, the problem is that there's not really a lot of very strong capital ship in yellow, so you have to almost rely exclusively on the green ones in the deck. And now that you don't have a triple dark raid, there's not really any reason to be playing the yellow version anymore. On the other side, if you're playing the blue version, the problem that I have with the blue version is that obviously it's built more as a control deck. The problem is that putting very big spaceships in the game earlier is a very proactive strategy, and those spaceships most of the time don't really do a good job at stabilizing the game. I think the only spaceship that is really good at stabilizing is kind of the 10 cost Devastator. The other ones are kind of depending on the arena. Some of them do heal you, but overall, the deck doesn't do it has this very proactive strategy where normally a control deck wants to be reactive and answering when opponent threats. And the thing is, what I found with the blue version is like the deck was not really good at controlling, and at the same time at controlling the game, because it had to play unit in space when the opponent was on the ground. For example, since when the game first released, a lot of people were playing in space, so the Piett blue really felt very good. But as we moved on into further in the seasons, people started to play more on the ground. We saw, of course, Sabine being a single off play. Quinlan is also mostly a land-based deck. Most of the decks in the games are still land-based, which has made all those spaceships going into space kind of were mismatching with what was happening on the ground. So if you want, it's completely okay to arena dodge your opponent when you're playing an aggro deck and you have the intention to race. But whenever you are trying to be controlling, having your unit being on the wrong side of the field is not a good thing at all. And this is what ultimately Piett Blue, I think, in my opinion, doesn't work, because you have to put all those giant space units in the wrong arena. So you could think, well, you could simply just play fewer space units, but then the deck doesn't really make any sense, and there's no really any reason to be playing Piett over another green black leader like Kira or Palpatine, for example. So overall, I feel like the blue version doesn't make much sense. The red version makes the most sense because it stabilizes the game. It really plays the control game really early on in the game, but once it has managed to ramp, it really switched over to slapping those big spaceship and then start to really go after the opponent's throat and really try to kind of like race. And this deck, in my opinion, is the gameplay makes a lot more sense, because playing those giant spaceship, even if you're in the wrong arena, is completely okay, as you can really slam the door and really do very, very well in that regard. Another thing that I really like about the deck is obviously the fact that it gives you access to planetary bombardment as well as Devastator, which in my opinion is the strongest card combination in this deck, and the main reason to be playing the deck in the first place, as well, of course, as being a fantastic tool against control. The fact that having access to Relentless and Planetary Bombardment gives you a really great control matchup all on by itself, which is really, really great. So this is something so obviously, this is my version of the deck. I'm going to go into the details of every single card choice, but first of all, let's go into the basics of the deck by talking about the leader, Amiral Piett. So Amiral Piett has this ability, of course, that allows you to play capital ship for 1 cost discount. We know resource cheating is very powerful in Star Wars Unlimited, and Piett is no exception, even though he's very limited to one specific unit type, which has always been a very big constraint in this game. But obviously the discount of 1 is extremely significant, that you almost have to pay nothing for. It just is the deck building constraint. And I think it's a leader that are only going to get stronger and stronger as more capital ship are being printed. When he gets deployed, he gets to get a 2 resource discount on his capital ship, which is really, really powerful. And the fact he deploys on 5 and has 7 health makes it is relatively difficult to kill, meaning that you're very likely to be able to benefit from the ability at least once or twice. So what I like to do personally is I like to play some sort of removal on turn 1, or something that will help me for the relationship of the game, then play a ramp on turn 2, then deploy Piett on turn 3, and then play a 6-drop spaceship. So you don't have to deploy Piett to play a 6-drop spaceship, you can simply just use the ability, but I like to have Piett deployed by the end of the turn, so then on the next turn I can actually play a 8-drop as my first action without having to deploy my Piett first. Which is very good, especially if you know you're going to have initiative. So the amount of resource cheating that it gives you throughout the game is very significant, and our deck is very much built to abuse his ability, where we're really going to reach a stage where we're really putting a capital ship every single turn to get the most out of his ability. And once again, what is really cool is, like, if he does get defeated, it's really not that big of a deal, because you're still going to get the 1 resource discount, which most of the time is more than enough to do what we are trying to do. So let's go now into our cheapest unit in the deck, and that is Salicious Crump. So this might be surprising to some of you guys, but I love Salicious Crump. It's not really an anti-aggro card, it's more like an anti-control card, and I explain you why first. I mean, obviously it's very strong if you're playing against a deck that has a lot of 1 health units on the ground. A Salicious Crump, of course, is going to be a great way to clean this up, and I also love to have a way to heal in the deck for cheap. Because sometimes later stage in the game, like a 1 healing is something that the opponent does not always expect, and it can make the difference between you dying in 1 action and you not dying in 1 action, which can literally save your life. Another cool thing we can do with Salicious Crump is deal 1 damage to ground units and then combine it with something like a Daring Raid in order to finish it off. You can also deal 1 damage to a 3/5 and then finish that unit with an open fire. So it does help you kind of clearing out units here and there, which I think is very nice. But the main purpose of Salicious Crump in this deck is to play around Paradoxide. Paradoxide is incredibly powerful against Piett because we do play very large units, and we usually play 1 large unit every single turn, making it very difficult to play around Paradoxide. So having a cheap unit that we can kind of jam in there so we can protect our units against Paradoxide's Avenger is extremely valuable against any blue-black control matchups. That's why we play 2 copies of those guys. Moving on, we got the Daring Raid. So the combination Daring Raid, Salicious Crump, in the game allows you to clear up any unit on the ground that has 3 health, which is very valuable. He also allows us to clear out any unit that has 2 health for a very cheap price. So it's a really cheap removal that we can easily curve alongside another unit, combining with something like a Restless Raider to kill something. It's something that I find to be quite valuable in the deck, and not only that, it can also go to face, which is very important. It's the card that works well against both aggro and control, and this is the kind of card that really helps us against deck that likes to go wide, which is something that the deck would have a lot of problem against, and Daring Raid really can help you dealing with those very explosive start that your opponent can have. But yeah, the fact that the card can go face is very important, because this deck is really meant on this ability to just get a couple of slam in, and usually you're not going to be able to kill someone in 2 attack, but you will be able to put him in range of like 2 or 3 or 4, and then you can just go Daring Raid, Restless Raider, or even using like a Devastator plus Daring Raid and deal the last bit of damage that way. So this deck has a lot of out-of-hand damage. This is why it can really become an aggressive deck whenever you want it to be, and you can really finish a lot of games by just combining Daring Raid with other out-of-hand damage that the deck has. Then we got Price on Your Head. So Price on Your Head is a card that, naturally speaking, people do not only play like Price on Your Head in a Bosk deck, but in this specific deck, I actually prefer this card over Super Laser Technician. And the reason because this deck has very, very weak turn 1 play, and Price on Your... So if you want to go all the good removals in the game, so Merciless Context and Open Fire, comes out on 3. That means that if you're playing the game, if you're playing the first turn of the game, you usually play something that really doesn't matter, and then you have to choose whether you want to ramp or whether you want to kill the opponent turn 1 play. Price on Your Head is great because it allows you to do both. You play the Price on Your Head, you play the first game, opponent plays the turn 1 play, we put Price on Your Head on it, and then we take initiative, and then we get to kill that turn 1 play with Merciless Contest or Open Fire or any other like combinations of like Daring Raid or what have you. So this kind of sequencing is one of the best early game you could possibly have in this game, because it allows you to both stabilize the board early and ramp at the same time. And there's no other way to do this than with Price on Your Head, because it's the only ramp that we can play on turn 1 and then curve into a removal on turn 2. So this is why I like Price on Your Head quite a bit more than Super Laser Technician. Especially Super Laser Technician can be very awkward because we don't have any way to kill our own Super Laser Technician. I think the only way is Salicious Crump, basically, or having to Daring Raid our own good, which is not what you want to do ideally. So Super Laser Technician can be very awkward. While Price on Your Head gives you that ability to ramp and kill something at the same time, which I think is great. So yeah. So next we got Prepare to Take Off. I love Prepare to Take Off in this deck because it is something very good we can do a turn 1. So obviously Prepare to Take Off, whenever you're playing against aggro and you're spending your first turn doing nothing, that doesn't feel great. But against any other deck than aggro, Prepare to Take Off is an absolutely amazing card that you can have on turn 1, because it's really good to be able to ramp, but if you ramp into and you don't find anything to play into, that's something that is really, really bad. Thanks to Prepare to Take Off, which we play 2 copies of, this almost never happened in that version of the deck, because it will give you access to so many vehicles. It almost guarantees hits, because we play so many vehicles in this deck. And obviously it will give you allow you to find your Devastator faster. It finds the most powerful cards of your deck for a cheap cost during a turn that doesn't really matter for this deck. Like the turn 1 play, we don't have a lot of strong turn 1 plays. If you play against anything else on aggro, spending that first turn of the game to get a 2 cards draw guaranteed with card selection as well is huge. It also allows us to find our sideboard cards, or for example a card like Relentless, which are strong against control, allows us to find those cards easier as well. It's a really great turn 1 play that is anything that is not aggro. Really, really great. Super Laser Technician is obviously one of the ramp cards we have. We only play 1 copy of it, so we do have some good ramps that we can do with this deck. But Super Laser Technician in a lot of situations is awkward, because if your opponent decided to not play any units, or if your opponent decides to play in space, we have no way to kill our own Super Laser Technician unless we have Salicious Crump. So most of the time, we prefer to go Resupply, which is somewhere here. Yeah, Resupply, which is obviously going to be our ramp on turn 2, which allows us to curve into Piett, and then all the rest of the game. Piett faster means all of the big spaceships come out faster as well. So obviously, we don't always go ramp in this deck, especially if you're playing against aggro. And in which case, we have a plan we will talk about after. So obviously, we have some early game removal. Merciless Contest allows us to kill something of any size for only 3 resource, and then Open Fire, which will get rid of all the 3-4 in space. Once again, allows us to stabilize the game early in order for us to not die too quickly. Is very important. Next, we got M330. So I was talking about earlier, we're not always going to be able to ramp. Sometimes we want to ramp, but we just prefer to answer what your opponent is doing, especially if you're playing against aggro. You can't really afford to spend 2 turns not doing anything. So against aggro, most of the time, we will prefer to not ramp and kill and deal the opponent threat with Merciless Contest or Open Fire. In which case, we're not going to be able to get into that critical 6-7 resource. We need to have something to play basically on turn 3. And MC30 is something we can play on turn 3 thanks to the discount. So this is probably the best capital ship that costs 5 resources we can have access to. It has a huge body that makes us for a very powerful overwhelming barrage. So it curves perfectly as turn 3 MC30, turn 4 overwhelming barrage, and we don't even need to deploy Piett to do that. So that's really, really powerful. So usually against aggro, the plan would be turn 1 play like a Salicious Crump or like a Daring Raid to deal with something. Turn 2 Open Fire Merciless Contest. Turn 3 MC30. Turn 4 Overwhelming Barrage on the MC30. It's currently like the dream sequence against aggro that we want. So MC30 is very important card in this deck because sometimes we're not always going to be able to ramp, and MC30 is here to give us a very powerful 4-drop, quote unquote. Next, we're going into the card that we want to curve into as we deploy Piett. Unfortunately, there is no good 7-drop in that color combination, so instead we play 6 drops, but we play some really good ones. So obviously we got the Gladiator. So Gladiator is really, really an amazing card in this deck because it's going to provide us with space defense. Of course, it can give Sentinels to itself and completely block the space arena, and we'll be able to face all those like early game units in that has a pilot on them and kind of completely stop them on that progression, which I think is great. Another thing we can do is like Sentinels, you can give Sentinels to any unit for a phase, and that also includes your leader. So something that we like to do as well is we can deploy Piett and then play the Gladiator to give Sentinels to Piett, you know, to block the ground arena. And being able to stabilize the ground arena whenever, just for a turn, whenever we are playing this deck is very valuable. And this then allows us to get into the second turn. We're just going to be putting Sentinels on Piett so Piett can absorb the damage against aggro deck. And then on the turn after, we can simply just go for Barrage on the Gladiator in order to kind of get rid of the board, or even sometimes even better. That's something very, very nice. So I really like Gladiator. I think he's a really great stabilizer. We play 3 copies of him. I think he's definitely one of the most underplayed capital ship. Some people prefer to play the Resupply Carrier, which I think is a lot worse, and I'll explain you why a little bit later on in this video. Obviously, we do play Relentless Raider, not as good at stabilizing as the Gladiator, but it is nevertheless a good card as it allows us, of course, to kill a unit, deal damage to a base. It is guaranteed damage. It deals damage on death and when played. It's really the best possible turn 4 play. Combined with the ramp whenever we are playing against control, because it's guaranteed damage, and it's not an easy card to deal with for control unless it has no glory only results, in which case we don't really care too much when defeated effect is turned against that. It's a bit annoying, but it's not the end of the world, and at least it's not a no glory that's going to go onto a larger spaceship that which we play plenty of. And obviously it dodges Fell the Dragon and Takedown, which is nice. Moving on, we got more expensive ones, the Architect. This one is a bit more situational. We only play 2 of it, but it is so great to be able to ambush into a very large space unit of your opponent and be able to ramp ourselves at the same time. And this is exactly what this deck is able to do. It is quite expensive. It also has really good stats. So even if you don't have the ambush, just being able to drop a 7-8 for 2 with a 1, 2, or even sometimes a 3 resource discount is absolutely huge. I'm saying 3 resource discount is if you're able to ramp, then you effectively can play this card 3 turns earlier than what you should be able to. And in this case, I'm putting this giant space body that we can then use Super Laser Blast with, Turbo Laser Blast, or Turbo Laser Salvo, or Overwhelming Barrage is extremely, extremely valuable. I think this card is very powerful, especially if you play against a space heavy deck. Moving on, we got, of course, the star of the deck. It is Devastator. Devastator is the absolute most important card of the deck, and the reason why you play the red version. It gives you, against aggro, it's a relatively good stabilizer, and obviously combines really great with a Barrage or Turbo Laser Salvo, or basically, once you play a Devastator, usually aggro deck won't be able to kill it. So if you're able to put the Devastator early enough in the game, and then follow up with either a barrage or turbo laser salvo or a planetary bombardment, you basically just completely stabilize the god, and then you put a very, very short clock on him. So it's both good against aggro and it's good against control. So yes, against control it's very fragile, it's gonna die very easily, but it gives you 4 guaranteed damage into base, and if by any chance your opponent doesn't deal with it, he knows he's pretty much dead next turn because of planetary bombardment. So this card is by far the biggest threat we can have in the deck, and be able to play this for a significant amount of resource discount and play it potentially on turn 4 is just incredible, and is obviously the most important card of the deck. And the fact that we're playing Prepare to Take Off gives us more chance to be able to draw into those Devastators and play them in a more consistent way. Then we got the other Devastator, the Inescapable Devastator, and this one is a great card as well, because once again we can play him with a strong discount, and this will allow us to deal with any unit and completely block the space arena at the same time. The fact that this card can basically kind of stabilize the space and the ground at the same time is really what we're looking for in this kind of deck, as well as providing a very short clock on your opponent, but usually the unit stays alive next to the attack space. And the thing is, 10 health units are not easy to deal with when they're dropped sometimes 1 turn, 2 turn, even 3 turns earlier than what they normally would. So obviously it's not, so yeah, it's simply just a great card. Against control, against aggro, we're going to be using this as the ultimate game stabilizer. Against control decks, it's more something that we're going to be using in order to kill with the enemy spaceship, as well as putting a threat at the same time. So now when we basically seen every single spaceship that we're running in this deck, let's go into the other more situational units. So basically the reason why we don't play a lot of non-capital ship card in this deck is because obviously we want to use and abuse the Piett discount as much as possible. And also that's why we play very few non-capital ship. But I do like to have a couple of them for situational purpose. And one of them is Pirate Battle Tank. So Pirate Battle Tank has 2 purposes in this deck. The first one is to give us a smuggle card, notably against Quinlan. Quinlan is really good on discard, likes to discard our cards. So smuggle is really good against Quinlan. The other purpose of this card is to give us access to a relatively large Sentinels on the ground. We know that we're pretty much giving up on the ground arena. We try to stabilize with Turbo Laser Salvo or Overwhelming Barrage, but sometimes we don't always find it, and it's nice to have an option that we can play from a resource row that allows us to kind of give us a kind of a life insurance, something that's going to allow us to race, to block the board just so one more turn, so we can kind of race in space. And Battle Tank does this pretty well. Sometimes you want to play it for smuggle, sometimes you actually want to play it on 6. It depends on the situation, but it's really has happened to be a great option. I play 2 copies of this guy. It's really good against aggro, and it's really good as a smuggle, and it's also a vehicle, which means that you can take it from Prepare to Take Off. So that's really nice. Moving on, another situational ground unit is Maul. So Maul that we play on 7, and it's gonna be our ways to kind of get rid of a massive 7 health units, usually to snipe a leader, to snipe a very problematic unit that we cannot easily take off otherwise. So once again, sometimes it's always like kind of a balance between putting a tremendous pressure on the opponent and sometimes having a specific answer. So this is the primary role of Maul, is really to answer specific units that might cause us really large issue. We also play, of course, Salicious Crump and a Parted Battle Tank, so sometimes we have a few Underworld we can redirect the damage of Maul into, which is nice. And obviously another job of Maul is also to be a finisher. When your opponent has a very low health units on the battlefield, we can just ambush Maul and then just deal like 5 or 6 damage overwhelm to opponent base and win the game like that as well. So I love to have, this deck can easily take the role of the aggressor whenever given the opportunity, and having another way to deal direct damage to base is really convenient. So we play 2 copies of Maul. Then we play 2 copies of Turbo Laser Salvo. This is obviously the inferior Barrage, but there's a few situations where it's actually better than Barrage, because sometimes there's just so many units on one arena that be able to wipe everything at once, regardless on that is very powerful. So it is a card that generally that will basically save us in a lot of situations, because having very large space unit does not win you the game unless you're able to stabilize with it, and Turbo Laser Salvo does that. So we play 2 copies of Turbo Laser Salvo in the main deck and 1 more in the sideboard against decks that are very based around one specific arena that likes to go wide. Then we obviously have Barrage. Obviously, Barrage is the most important card of the deck after the Devastator slash planetary bombardment combo. The Overwhelming Barrage is going to be our most important tool, and obviously buff up our very large space units as well as killing a bunch of units and being relatively affordable, which means that we can easily curve into a space unit and then play Barrage at the same time, basically on the turn after very easily. So yeah, Barrage it's one of the best cards in Star Wars Limited, and in his deck is absolutely insane. Then we obviously got Planetary Bombardment. So Planetary Bombardment, there's two main ways we want to use it. The first way is obviously in combination against aggro. Usually we want to use it in combination with a Devastator. So we get the Devastator in play, and then we use Planetary Bombardment as a super, basically as a sort of a better version of the Overwhelming Barrage to basically completely get rid of the board and deal a couple of damage in the base. So that's basically option number one. Option number two is we have a Devastator in play, and we simply just want to go straight to the base, the 12 damage to the base, and finish the game. This card is also very useful against control. So against control, we are going to be using more often when an opponent has no unit in play, and we happen to have a capital ship in play. We're going to go straight 12 damage to the base with this, and that's going to, not going to win the game instantly, but that's going to put us in a very good position against control to be able to do play like this. Obviously, there's some situation, it's relatively hard to have a capital ship sticking on the board whenever you play against control. So sometimes we are just happy to just deal 8 damage directly to opponent's face. Don't be afraid to do this. Deal 8 damage directly to opponent base. Whatever you play against control is completely valid play if you're able to put enough pressure and if you have enough out of hand damage in your hand. And this is really this card that gives us a really good matchup against control, generally speaking. So now we're going to talk about the sideboard a little bit. So let me go back to the list. To the list. So this is basically our sideboard. On main deck, we basically talked about everything. We get the idea. Turn one, if you're playing against aggro, we're going to be trying to go price on your head. Either we're going to go Salicious Crump plus Daring Raid, or we're going to go price on your head, and then turn 2 open fire so we can ramp and deal with opponent turn 2 play. Or sometimes we just don't do anything. We just do something that doesn't make much difference, but then we will go open fire, and then we don't run, we go empty 30, then barrage. So there's basically different sequencing is basically, the ideal is obviously press on your head, then removal, so we can ramp, and then we go directly into Gladiator, and then after Gladiator we go barrage, or barrage, and that's usually the kind of sequencing that's going to help us against aggro. So let's talk a little bit, before we get into the sideboard, let's talk a little bit about the matchup. So the matchups for this deck is pretty straightforward. It does really well into mid-range, as you can expect, because we play large things. He's not fast enough to be able to kill us before we get online with our big stuff, and our big stuff will either just kill them very quickly, or just completely overpowered what they have on the board by being able to, like Triple Laser Salvo, Overwhelming Barrage, and Planetary Bombardment. So just excellent card against mid-range. And we're just going to be able to overpower them. Against control, we also do pretty well because we have a deck that has a lot of way to deal out of end damage. So we have a lot of inevitable damage, if that makes sense. We're going to have Relentless Raiders, we can go Daring Raid into the face. We prepare to take off, we basically don't run out of gas because we just draw so many cards. We have, of course, the Planetary Bombardment, which often results into 8 to 12 damage direct into face. And then we, of course, have those Devastators. And we also have some really, really solid sideboard options against control, like Palpatine's Returns and Relentless. Aggro matchup is obviously the difficult one because, as you know, we have very weak early game plays. And so we are relatively fragile to aggro. And this is something that I've decided on my deck building to do. I decided to kind of give up on the Sabine matchup because I don't think the Sabine matchup is solvable. There's a few cards that I could play that would improve the Sabine matchup that we'll talk about after. Unfortunately, they don't really improve the matchup enough for me to be worth running. So I've decided to say, okay, listen, I'm not going to have a good matchup against Sabine. So I'm just going to decide to have a good matchup against all the kind of aggro decks. And notably, this deck does very well against the new Vader yellow deck, especially after sideboard because we have so many AoEs. And this is something I've decided to do with the deck, is to kind of focus on beating all this type of aggro decks and say, okay, that's fine, I'm not going to beat Sabine. It's not like Sabine is an auto-lose matchup, but it is definitely a very, very bad matchup. But the thing is, like, the meta is so incredibly open, I don't think it is worth it to make your deck, to completely transform your deck, just in order to kind of help a matchup that is really bad, just to improve that matchup by 5%. It's better to just to ignore this matchup, because chances are the meta is so open you're not even going to encounter this deck, and focus on the other matchups. And this is what I decided to do with that version of Piet Red. So I'll talk about later on in the video what kind of card you can play in order to improve your Sabine matchup, but in my opinion it's a waste of time to try to improve your Sabine matchup. You're not going to make it a good matchup for you anyways, and I think you're kind of wasting your time by trying to improve that matchup. So moving on then to the sideboard. So first of all, before we get into the sideboard, I just want to let you know that you can currently get on the card market a Devastator for €7. It's a card that dropped in price a lot since it's been the promo for the store showdown. So get your hands on them. They are honestly quite cheap for a card that was used to be one of the most expensive card in the set. So buy when they are low. So getting into now the sideboard, we're going to talk about with Grenade Strike. So Grenade Strike gives us a really good removal we can play on turn 1, and it's really good against the other type of aggro deck. So right now there's the Sabine deck. If you think about what the aggro decks I currently see play right now, we have the Sabine decks, and then you got others. You got the Hantu ECL, and then you got the Vader yellow deck. So the Grenade Strike does really well against those two other kind of aggro decks, against the opponent like Miss Canada, and plus like another card played with the hand discount. You go Grenade Strike, you kill both of them, very very cheap. And if you manage to make that play, you pretty much win the game, because you basically completely cancel their turn 1 play, and then from that point on, you just have to ramp and then do your normal game plan, and you should be able to win, and then do a good barrage. And if things go under control, you already kind of won the game. So that's really really impactful. It's really really good against, once again, the Vader 4, be able to kill 2 units at once on the first turn of the game, which is the turn that usually we don't do anything powerful. Grenade Strike allow you to do something very powerful at a stage of the game where normally you don't have much powerful things to do at this stage of the game. Then we got the Bombing Run that is basically serves the same. It works against the same kind of decks as a Grenade Strike. Obviously, it's not something we can play on turn 1, but it's something that is going to be helping us against those specific decks. Even though its price is a little bit awkward, basically anything that costs more than 4 is a bit awkward, because usually at that stage of the game we prefer to play Capital Ship than playing answers, but some answers are worth playing and allows you to stabilize the game, and Bombing Run is one of those answers. So it really really helps whenever we are whenever we are racing and your opponent plays very very wide on the ground or in space. Bombing Run just helps so much. So those are pretty much our anti-control card. So we have an anti-mid-range card, which is Turbo Laser Salvo, which helps against wide aggro decks as well. But Turbo Laser Salvo is simply just going to be our an additional copy against like decks that like to go wide, like things like the what's it called, the Ray green decks, for example, that like to go wide with a large amount of ground units. This card is just gonna destroy Ray Green, like just gonna destroy everything she has. And yes, she's gonna recover from it because she can just do infinite value, but at the meantime, you still have very large pounder in space that's just gonna kill her in a couple of turns. So Turbo Laser Salvo is just really really strong in this matchup and in other kind of mid-range matchup, and that's why we put our third copies of Turbo Laser Salvo to help with that. And then we have our anti-control package. So as you can expect, of course, Palpatine's Return is going to be an absolute monster in this matchup. If you really want to improve your matchup against control even more, you can run Salvage on top of Palpatine's Return. I prefer Palpatine's Returns because we can also reanimate Maul for discount, and it also doesn't deal damage to one of our units, which actually matters. So, but overall, yeah, Palpatine's Return I think is, but yeah, you can run Salvage and Palpatine's Return if you need more copies of Palpatine's Returns, basically. And obviously, the main objective is going to be, if your opponent is low in HP, the best way to do is to basically focus on bringing out Devastators over and over again and just pound enemy base. If your opponent is very, very healthy, then the priority is going to be to bring back some Relentless and try to make sure that those Relentless survive, so you can get a couple of good shots. And obviously, we bring Relentless, which obviously is already one of the best cards against control, but in this case, we can get them for a discount. One of the main answers against Relentless nowadays is to play Annihilator. Most control deck will beat Relentless with Annihilator, but the fact that we can play Relentless for 2 resources cheaper, so for 1 or 2 resources cheaper, means that we can Relentless on the board 2-3 turns, and sometimes even 4 turns before opponents can drop an Annihilator, and that means that we can benefit from that card for a very, very long time before your opponent can even have the resource to answer it, granted they actually draw the answer. So, and then of course we can bring back those over and over again with Palpatine, even though, honestly, as I said, most of the time I just prefer to bring back Devastator most of the time, because of the guaranteed damage, but it really depends on the situation. If you can play around, if you have like a Salicious Crump in play, you can play around Avenger, and you have and your opponent is relatively low in HP. Obviously, bringing back Relentless is going to be better, but don't underestimate bringing back Devastator. It's so good. And once again, always put this pressure. Opponent will have to kill it, and sometimes we'll have to make very inefficient stuff in order to deal with it, because he knows that if he doesn't deal with it and you have a bombardment in hand, it's pretty much game over for him. So that's something that is just always on the back of his head. Yeah, so that's basically it for the sideboard. So now let's take into, I just want to talk about the card I've decided to not include in the deck and kind of give a bit of explanation about this. So first of all, we'll talk about the card that are considerations, card that I strongly considered including in the deck, but I've decided not to, and I'll explain you why. First of all, we got Scanning Officer. Scanning Officer is a great card against the Quinlands and the hand green decks. And it gives us something really good to do on turn 1 against those decks. And we know that turn 1 is very weak, so having something good to do is nice. The problem is Scanning Officer is only really good if you actually play first. Because then you play first, you run Scanning Officer, and then there's a smuggle cards, and you can blow them out, and that's great. The thing is, once again, that only really truly works if you're playing this on turn 1 against Quinlan, which we will do most of the time. Which, yeah, I don't know. But yeah, it's something you can consider. It's something you can consider playing against if you have a meta that has a lot of hand green and a lot of Quinlan. Yeah, so definitely a strong consideration. Another card also is Reinforcement Walker. It gives you like some winning HP. Usually when you reach that stage of the game, you prefer to play other stuff than Reinforcement Walker, but there's no capital ship that actually gives you life in this color combination, and Walker does that, so that's a consideration. And you also can get it from Prepare to Take Off. Then you get Force Choke. Force Choke is one of these cards which will help your Sabine matchup, but they don't really, because they allow you to once again get yourself a turn 1 answer against those Battlefield Marine, those Sabine. But the thing is, like, you do this on turn 1, you make your opponent draw a card. So, and if you put up the space, the card is useless. It's really only good against Sabine. That's kind of where I'm getting at. So the card is it can be quite good, but it's very specialized, and I don't feel like it improved the matchup tremendously. So if you want to improve your Sabine matchup, you can include Force Choke, but personally I decided not to. Then we have Shoot Down. So Shoot Down is nice as it provides the space and answer, but the problem with the same problem I have with Shoot Down is the same that I have with Force Choke, is that if you have the opponent opens the space, then it doesn't really do much. So if you want to improve your matchup against people who like to play space, if I really want to play against Vader 4 yellow, I prefer to play Grenade Strike personally. But yeah, it is obviously a card that can be helpful against, once again, the Sabine deck if your opponent goes space. Another card that can be good if your opponent likes to open space is to play Outlaw Corona, especially if you have the initiative. That will actually stabilize, and then okay, your opponent can ramp if he kills it, but he's gonna have to mobilize some resource to be able to kill it. And if you're playing an aggro deck, he's not really benefiting so much from the actual ramp. So Outlaw Corona is another very specialized card that can help you. Those are the kind of card that can help you against Sabine, but I've decided to not include them because I've decided to give up on the Sabine matchup, and I think that including those cards in the deck do improve the matchup, but they don't improve it enough for me to be considering them. Then I'm going to talk about the card that I don't like. First of all, the Resupply Carrier. The problem I have with Resupply Carrier is that the ramp does not actually matter so much most of the time. So you would think, yeah, this card that allows you to ramp into it. Basically, the only card that we are really happy to ramp into at this stage of the game when you play Resupply Carrier is basically ramping into Devastator, the 10 cost Devastator. Any other things, you just basically kind of like, you're playing Resupply Carrier, but you would be able to play the Devastator on the turn after anyway, using the Piett discount anyway. So Resupply Carrier ramping really doesn't matter most of the time. And honestly, whenever you are getting to a point where you're deploying Piett to play a 6-drop, you want to play something that has an impact on the game. You cannot just afford to be ramping again and not have an impact. You want to be playing something like a Ruthless Raider that can actually kill something, or play a Gladiator that actually can protect you. So Resupply Carrier doesn't do enough for the deck. It has really bad stats, and once again, it doesn't help. It doesn't give you a good body for barrage, unlike like the extra attack that, for example, that Gladiator has gives you better barrage. It's also very relevant. So it is something that it doesn't do a good job of stabilizing game, and a ramp most of the time just doesn't matter. I think it's a mistake to include Resupply Carrier in this deck. Another card that I'm not a big fan in this deck is Invisible Hand. So Invisible Hand has better stat than Gladiator, but it doesn't have, once again, I like Invisible Hand a lot more than I like Resupply Carrier, because actually it has very good stats at the very least. Like a 6/6 stat line is just really good, so it gives you really good barrage at the very least. But the problem is, the Invisible Hand is really, to get the full potential of the card, you need to be playing a bunch of droids in your deck that are just horrible cards. So you have to, if you're just playing this as a 6/6 for 6, I would much rather be playing Ruthless Raiders and Gladiator. And if you're using this, with a bunch of droids, then you have to make your deck so much worse to make this card actually good, because the droids are just terrible. The turn 1 droid plays are simply just not good cards at all, and you're just making the deck so much worse in order to include that card into your deck. Then we got Eager's Escort Fighter as another kind of situational answer for space, which can be nice. The problem is, like, on turn 2, you would much rather just be playing a ramp card, or removal that are just much better than this. For example, Open Fire is basically an Eager's Escort Fighter that works for both space and ground. So I guess you can play this in addition to Open Fire, but is it really needed? I don't think so. And then we got Phase 3 Dark Troopers, which is another kind of situational thing that you put on the ground that I don't really like, because it doesn't really stabilize the game. Once again, when you're playing on 3, you'd much rather be playing like a permanent solution, like a removal, or you would rather just be ramping rather than playing a 3-drop. So I simply just not the kind of thing I want to do on turn 2 when I'm playing this deck. Anyway, that's the end of this video. Thank you so much for following this. It's a very, so basically, who should be playing Piett? I think that if you are in a meta that there's not a lot of Sabine deck, Piett is a really good option. It's good against pretty much all the other decks I've talked about in this video, and I think this specific version of the deck will do great in those specific kind of matchups. And it will also, it's also a deck that is very easy to play. It has a very streamlined game plan. It knows what it does, and obviously slamming giant capital ships and just wiping the entire board with barrage and Troopers de Salvo is very fun and satisfying, and that's what I like about this deck. So yeah, thank you so much here for following that video, and if you enjoyed the video, please leave a like and subscribe, and I'll see you next time.